Good evening and welcome. I'm Cristle Judd, the president of Sarah Lawrence College, and it's my great privilege and pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Last year, as many of you know, we undertook a series on democracy and education, and if you didn't take part or see that series, much of it is archived on our website, and I would encourage you to visit that archive. And last spring, as we were engaged in conversations on the campus about our values and our vision, and especially what it meant to be committed to diversity and to inclusive excellence, we decided that we would continue this series, but that this year we would focus on difference in dialogue. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but first I want to acknowledge gratefully Cy and Vicki Ford. Vicki is a member of our Board of Trustees who have underwritten this series for us this year, and it's such an important part, so thank you, Cy and Vicki. So one of our goals for structuring this series as dialogues was to create occasions where we could model competing perspectives, competing views, competing experiences. And so for each of these, as you'll see, there are at least two interlocutors involved. Some of you were here a couple of weeks ago when we had women running for office, a bipartisan panel of women who were talking about their experience in office. And as we thought about the various panels, we knew that one of them should focus on the issues of campus climate and inclusive excellence. And we also knew that we wanted to draw together leaders from diverse institutions of higher education for a conversation on the issues. So I'm especially grateful to my fellow presidents who are here tonight. On the one hand, none of them have time to do this. On the other hand, we all know that this is exactly the thing for which we must take the time. In thinking about this panel months ago, starting last spring, and the broader outline of the series Differences in Dialogue, when we settled on this date, the date before the midterm elections, I suspected that we would all be talking in some kind of heightened emotional tones. But I confess that we didn't actually choose the date strategically to be the night before the midterms. We chose it because Silveria was here for the Army Air Force game, and because he ran the New York Marathon yesterday. So in a lighthearted vein, as you know, at Sarah Lawrence, we don't have a football team, and I'm not about to run a marathon, so we already are in a different place. But when we settled on the date of the Monday before the midterms, I knew that one or the other or several of our campuses might be in the midst of confronting issues. When we began organizing the panel, I just didn't expect that it would be our campus to be in the midst of confronting issues that we are preparing to talk about tonight. But because we are, and because it's very much on the minds of many in this room, I'd like to say something about that as we begin. As some of you know, a couple of weeks ago, a member of our faculty, Sam Abrams, published an opinion piece in the New York Times. It was entitled, "Think Professors Are Liberal, Try Administrators." This prompted a vigorous response and an equally vigorous counter-response, not only on campus, but across varied social media channels. So let me state the principles I believe are operative in this situation and use it as an illustration as we begin our broader conversations. First, and unequivocally, academic freedom is a fundamental principle at Sarah Lawrence College. That means, as a member of our faculty, Professor Abrams has every right and the full support of the college to pursue and publish this work. Second, vigorous and rigorous debate is at the heart of our enterprise. The opinion piece made claims that many on our campus understandably found not only controversial, but insulting and even personally intimidating, for which the proper response is vigorous and informed debate and criticism. Those who disagree with the published opinion have every right to respond and even to protest the views expressed in the piece. And third, as a diverse and inclusive community, we are governed by principles of mutual respect. That means that no one has the right to remove or destroy personal property and replace it with messages of intimidation, as occurred on Professor Abrams' door the evening following the piece's publication. Nor is it acceptable to post anonymous ad hominem accusations around campus, as occurred last week. While such responses are undoubtedly the action of a few, they not only contravene our principles of mutual respect, and as such are subject to consequences, but they undermine our commitment to building a genuinely inclusive community. So, academic freedom is a fundamental principle at Sarah Lawrence. Vigorous and rigorous debate is at the heart of our enterprise, And as a diverse and inclusive community, we're governed by principles of mutual respect. It's an illustration for us in real time of many of the challenging topics that I hope we'll engage together this evening. Issues that can roil a campus and often seem at unresolvable odds with each other. Academic freedom, freedom of speech, limitations on speech, principles of mutual respect. Whose respect carries the day? Diversity and inclusion, safety. Whose safety? What sort? We are all called to be leaders in the civil dialogue and debate at a time when that is crumbling around the country, and that is the point of this series. Difference in dialogue illustrates our belief in this and our commitment to allowing and engaging all points of view. So as we start tonight, after that preface that I thought it was just helpful for us to have here at Sarah Lawrence, I'd like to give an overview of the evening. We'll have a dialogue for about 45 minutes, taking up these issues in response to our own campus, our perspectives. We will then open out to discussion with the audience for the remaining 45 minutes or so. We have about an hour and a half tonight. For that discussion with the audience, the ground rules we've used for all of Difference in Dialogue is that we start with questions from our students. We are an academic institution, and students are at the heart of what we do. And when the student questions have diminished or finished, then we open them up to the rest of you. And we're delighted to have all of you here, members of our community, members of our faculty, visitors, but our students are at the heart of this discussion. And we'll start off, though, by, you have biographies of our panelists. I won't take time to read those. You have those. But by each of us telling you a little bit about our institutions as a start, to understand what's and who is represented on this stage, and then we will open out into a conversation. So for most of you know me, I'm Cristle Judd, the president of Sarah Lawrence. I'm in my second year here. I came to Sarah Lawrence from the Mellon Foundation, before that Penn and Bowdoin. Sarah Lawrence, I have an audience who knows this, but my colleagues may not fully. We're a liberal arts college with about 1,400 undergraduates. We were founded in 1926 as a progressive institution. We give only the BA in the liberal arts, and then we have 3 suites of graduate programs in the arts and teaching and learning in health. We also have an early childhood center, and we have many, many firsts to our credit. But above all, we are focused on, as an institution that believes in the liberal arts and the value of the liberal arts. Thomas? Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you to President Judd for the invitation to your campus and for the opportunity to participate this evening on the panel. I think it's really wonderful to see the 3 freedoms that issues that you espoused earlier on. I think it's really critical to what we do in our institutions. My institution, I'm your closest neighbor here. I'm from Bronx Community College, 6 miles to be exact from here. Bronx Community College is a part of CUNY, which is the City University of New York. We're located in the University Heights section of the Bronx. We have about 11,000 students. We are an open access institution. What that means is that we're not as selective as your institution or your institution really. Our mission really basically is to provide access to students in our neighborhood. And 55% of our students are first-generation students, which means they are the first in their families to go to college. Because of our location in the Bronx, we have recent immigrants, people that just move into the Bronx, as primarily our students. We have students from about 100 countries. We award the Associate of Science and the Associate of Arts and the Associate of Applied Science. The first 2 degrees basically are transfer degrees, which means they spend 2 years with us and they transfer to one of our senior colleges. The Associate of Applied Arts Science, that degree basically prepares people for work. I'm in my 4th year at this particular institution. Prior to that, I was the president for 6 years at Cumberland County College, which is in South Jersey. Primarily, I moved to New York because of the diversity. I love people, but it doesn't really matter whether they're green, blue, yellow. I just love humanity, and I love what I do at the college. So I'll tell you more later. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will just add that we've been in conversations about where our collaborations might be between Sarah Lawrence and Bronx Community College as our nearest neighbor.
Cristle, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was timed for the football game, which we lost. And I did finish the marathon barely. My son crushed it, and the marathon crushed me. So, but I'm upright, breathing oxygen, and walking. So, which is really my goal. So thank you for having me. It's a privilege for me to be among these university presidents. I'm Jay Silveria. I'm the superintendent at the United States Air Force Academy, which is another word for president at our university, which is really a college. It's a 4-year institution. We award a Bachelor of Science degree only in 4 years. We graduate about 1,000 students every year, and it's to a single employer, to the United States Air Force. So one thing that's very unique about the United States Air Force Academy is that when we manage our accessions, we are signing someone up for 4 years into the institution, of course. But half of our graduates go on to fly, like I did, go on to pilot training and go on to fly in the United States Air Force. And the other half go on to various other missions and various other roles in the Air Force. If you go to fly, you're in the Air Force for 10 years. If you don't fly, you're in the Air Force for a minimum of 5 years. So I point all that out, that when we assess our 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, we're signing them up for either 9 years or 14 years at that point. So accessions and admissions and how we do that are a very big deal for us. So I mentioned it's a 4-year system. We are STEM focused to really meet the demands of a technological force that we're feeding our graduates into. It's a 4-class system. Part of what we do is a military training program. So we wear our uniforms and cut our hair and march to lunch every now and then. But also part of that is that our seniors and juniors are in leadership roles as they develop. It's a leadership lab for them to begin to understand that part of what they're going to do as an officer in the United States Air Force. The Bachelor of Science degree, as I mentioned, heavy into STEM. We are primarily focused, our aeronautical and astronautical engineering are consistently among the top in the nation, but all of our engineering divisions are very highly qualified across our academic curriculum. Even if you major in political science, you take your aeronautical engineering and your astronautical engineering, so that gives you an idea of the focus of what we have. We also have extensive athletic programs, and not really just to talk about the fact that there's a football program, but all 4,400 students are athletes. If you're not competing in Division I sport, you're competing in a club sport. If you're not competing in a club sport, then you have to play in intramurals. Everybody's expected to be an athlete. That's part of our program. And I mentioned the military training, that we do some of that, but we also do things like fly airplanes and gliders and stuff there in Colorado, which are an important part of preparing these young men and women to be officers. Other aspects of what we do is a lot of focus on character and ethics for our training and our development. And the truth is, you want that, and we want that. If we're going to send these young men and women off to war, we want them to fight in an American way of war to represent our values and our morals. And that's very important, especially when I go back to the beginning where I said we signed them up for 9 years and 14 years. So we care very much, probably more about their qualities than their qualifications, since we're stuck with them for 9 years or 14 years, and we ask a lot of them. So that's an important part of what we do in our honor code and our character development and our ethics training. So, I think I'll close there and wait for how the panel wants to go, but I'm looking forward to being with this, Cristle.
Thanks. I'm Laura Sparks. I'm the president of Cooper Union, the 13th president of the institution and the first woman to serve in the role, and had the good fortune to meet both Jay and Cristle, I guess almost 18 months ago now, right? And one of the reasons why I was so glad to see the collection of folks on the stage was that one of the experiences I had probably about 5 years ago now was to meet one of Jay's colleagues. I didn't know Jay at the time, but a 4-star general who oversees the Air Force's space operation. And one of the things that I learned in that session was how similar he and I were, which I think we both found shocking. And it taught me a lot about how to really unpack what somebody's views are, what they're thinking, and so it's really great to see this collection of people. Thank you for putting it together, Cristle. So Cooper Union, for those who don't know, is a small school with, I think, some pretty big ideas over the years. We were founded in 1859, so pre-Civil War, by a man named Peter Cooper, who had what was at the time a radical commitment to diversity. We were among the first institutions to proactively admit people of all races, genders, religions, Peter Cooper was a very religious man himself, and yet thought it was critically important to make sure that people from all walks of life, all religious beliefs, came to this institution. We actually started off as an open access institution. Our founder believed that the way to improve someone's both economic livelihood and the ability to participate as a public citizen was to provide a high quality education regardless of somebody's socioeconomic status. And so we were started as an institution that was intended to provide an education that was, as he said it, equal to the best for working class people who didn't have access to the Harvards and the Yales of the world. Over time, we evolved into what has become a highly selective institution with primarily an undergraduate focus. We have about 950 students in schools of art, architecture, and engineering, and we have a humanities program that all of our students move through as part of their work in getting a degree. So a lot of what we focus on is the undergraduate program, and yet we also very much think of ourselves as an institution that goes beyond a traditional academic institution. When we were founded, Peter Cooper opened a venue called the Great Hall, which is in the basement of the building that we're still in. And he intended that space to be a place of public discourse, a place of civic organizing and activism. So it's where Abraham Lincoln made his famous Right Makes Might speech, where he argued against the expansion of slavery, and Lincoln credits that speech to launching his bid to the presidency. One of the fascinating things that Peter Cooper did to keep the economic model of the school alive was to rent out space in the building. And one of the people who rented space was Susan B. Anthony. She had an office on the second floor of the building, and she and Elizabeth Cady Stanton used to go downstairs and organize and advocate for a woman's right to vote in the Great Hall. Early meetings to form the NAACP took place there. They would hold executive meetings up the street and have the big public organizing meetings in the Great Hall. Some of the earliest workers' rights campaigns took place in the Great Hall. And so we see ourselves as very much steeped in an important history and an important piece of American history in advancing the principles of democracy, and I think of a healthy democracy. And I think very much try to ask ourselves every day, are we living up to that initial ideal? Beyond the undergraduate program and the civic work, we also have programs for middle and high school students through to continuing education as part of our effort to make sure that learning is a process that continues throughout someone's life.
So, Laura, as you make that observation, understanding these four institutions and how different our foundings and our roots were, Sarah Lawrence as a progressive institution, but as an institution for wealthy women whose families could pay, which was a fundamental contradiction in a way with the progressive goals of the education, and then how each of our institutions live through those histories. But part of thinking about this focus for us today on diversity in all its forms of identity, of experience, of viewpoint, and how we each think of that in our institutions is a place I'd like to start us off. And with Jay's permission, I'm going to play for you, we are going to play for you a film clip, a YouTube viral video from last November, September, it was earlier, but a year ago, of an address that Jay gave at the Air Force Academy. So hopefully that's going to happen. There you go.
And I'll tell you that the appropriate response for horrible language and horrible ideas, the appropriate response is a better idea. So that's why I'm here. That's why all these people are up here on the staff tower. So let me have everybody who's up here please pull forward to the rails. Also, there are so many people here, they're lining the outsides along the windows. These are members of the faculty, coaching staff, AOCs, AMTs, from the airfield, from my staff, from my headquarters. All aspects of the 10th Air Base Wing, all aspects that make up USAFA and the United States Air Force Academy. Leadership is here. You heard from Brigadier General Goodwin. Brigadier General Armacost is here. Colonel Block from the athletic department is here. Mr. Knowlton is in Washington, D.C. right now. That's why they're here. That's why we're all here, because we have a better idea. Some of you may think that that happened down in the prep school and doesn't apply to us. I would be naive, and we would all be naive to think that everything is perfect here. We would be naive to think that we shouldn't discuss this topic. We would also be tone deaf not to think about the backdrop of what's going on in our country. Things like Charlottesville and Ferguson, the protests in the NFL. That's why we have a better idea. One of those ideas, the dean brought people together to discuss Charlottesville. Because what we should have is a civil discourse and talk about these issues. That's a better idea. We received outstanding feedback from that session at Charlottesville. But I also have a better idea, and it's about our diversity. And it's the power of the diversity, the power of the 4,000 of you and all of the people that are on the staff tower and lining the glass, the power of us as a diverse group. The power that we come from all walks of life, that we come from all parts of this country, that we come from all races, we come from all backgrounds, gender, all makeup, all upbringing. The power of that diversity comes together and makes us that much more powerful. That's a much better idea than small thinking and horrible ideas.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Jay, as we start this, to talk about, I think for all of us as presidents, we're constantly called on for when are we going to make statements to our institution, when are we going to make public statements, what happens when we make a statement that we make for our institution and it's out in the world. And you're a year on from that, and it was a statement to your institution, but you had alums, you had all kinds of other people involved. So to talk a little bit about what it meant in that moment, but then what followed on in the kind of action from the affirmation of diversity.
Yeah, I learned an awful lot. It was a remarkable experience. I mean, I stepped up at that podium because in our prep school, wasn't even at our academy, at our preparatory school we have on the campus, where 250 kids attend, someone had written a racial slur on 6 different message boards outside of dorm rooms, telling 6 African-American cadets to get out with a racial slur. And which was disgusting, very much against our values, unacceptable in the Air Force, unacceptable the academy, and then also in context of Charlottesville that had just happened a couple weeks prior. So everything was charged, you know, everything was amped up, and so I felt like I needed to, at the moment, to draw a line about the values and the principles. That I couldn't let something like that stand. That there would be a temptation as an administrator, a temptation as a president, to say something like, we're very concerned and we're looking into it. Right? Isn't that what we hear a lot of times? Yes, we're checking, we're not sure, but I don't know. But nothing that I was working through as an answer to that, I felt like was going to work. So I arrived at, I had to draw a red line, and that I had to say that it was a principle-based about our values. You'll notice that if you've seen the full thing, I don't blame anybody. There's no blaming of anything to anyone. It just said that something happened and that it's unacceptable. And so, what's interesting is that since I never intended that to go to, we had 8 million views. The media specialists will tell us when you multiply that out and win other places, there's about 24 million. Of course, I never expected it. What was interesting is that some people, like the alum that you mentioned, and in some parts of the Air Force, came back to me that, why did you do that? You were, grandstanding or putting yourself out there. It wasn't for you. It was for the 4,000 cadets on the floor. I also got other questions about, well, clearly you did this because you're lacking leadership from the national level leadership. You're lacking some kind of leadership. No, I did it because someone wrote something on a message board. And so it was very interesting to me that people heard what they wanted to hear. They didn't hear the real words that were actually there.
So we are in this moment, right, of both how do you work within your institution and the constituencies beyond. But Thomas, you have a very different student body than a fully residential Air Force Academy. So where and how do these issues come to play with students from 100 countries, first generation students, right?
We have a very different student body, but we have the same issues. In fact, really, we have 61% of our student body Hispanic, 23% African American, then the other tribes, other groups. When I came in 4 years ago to the college was divided along those lines. My predecessor didn't do a great job of really bringing the groups together. From what I understand later, I mean, she sort of played off the different groups, both in the terms of the faculty and staff and in terms of the student body. For me, working together and collaboration, campus climate and civility is very important to me. The work that you want to do, there is no way you're going to get the work done if you can't bring people together. And the key word for me is respect. I am very, very sensitive to it. I think it's a two-way street. If you want to be respected, then you can also dole out the respect. So me coming to the campus, the first thing I brought the faculty, the senior level faculty, all of the different governance structure. The message I basically give out on campus is that as your president, basically same thing you repeated, that I expect all of us to treat each other with respect. And the only way we're going to get the work done is to be respectful to one another. We can have an honest conversation. We can have an honest dialogue, disagree with one another, and still walk away with a handshake at the end of the day.
So let me push on this, and anybody can take it. And Laura, you may want to pull into this too, because part of the pushback we all get to the moment of a dialogue that is equal with respect is the moment when, I mean, I would talk about for Sarah Lawrence that we value diversity in all of its contexts, diversity of identity, diversity of experience, diversity of gender, diversity of viewpoint, right? But the moment we start using that word diversity as that wonderful, huge term, and then we try to move from that, from what is it to move from diversity to inclusion, where do we find the space for those intersections of opinions that would seem to say that someone else doesn't have the right to exist, right? Where do we get from ideology to identity? I mean, Laura, I'm going to look at you because you haven't spoken yet, but that, it seems to me, is the crux of how we create that space for respect of fundamental humanity when our viewpoints can push sometimes so hard to that identity.
Yeah, I mean, I think what can be complicated about that is we talk about these things, diversity of race, diversity of culture, diversity of gender, diversity of viewpoint, diversity of ideas, as though they are separate. And yet, I think we know and we experience that often it takes having a diversity of identities and a diversity of life experiences in a conversation to build the kind of trust that is required to have understanding of one another's viewpoints. And that's where it becomes messy, because I think so many of us would like to believe that regardless of our lived experience, we can understand somebody else's view, and yet we know from all kinds of research and our own day-to-day existences that that isn't true. And that's where I think we have to work really hard to understand the interplay of these things and to make sure that in creating an environment in which we want to be able to have respectful debate about various views, that we have enough experiences and identities in the room to be able to trust that that can be a full and complete conversation.
How do you manage that? And anybody can break in now. I mean, I'm loosely the moderator, but this is supposed to be it's 4 presidents on the stage. Good luck with that. on the one hand, our various campuses may or may not be in the bubble, so to speak, of our campus, but there are all these external pressures creating vulnerabilities of different sorts, different notions of safety that I think also are at play in the kind of respect or relationship you're trying to create.
I'd offer that, at least from our perspective, that I think so many times we tend to, when we speak of diversity in a lot of aspects, it's the outward things that you see. It's things as skin color or accents or clothing, as the guy who's dressed like a Bolivian dictator up here, right? That comes with assumptions or stereotypes of meaning. But the real diversity comes in those thoughts and diversity of ideas, and truly that's what makes us better. I mean, we know, as simple as we know, businesses that are more diverse make more money. So if for no other reason than success of your business, and our view is that for us, we want in our business that it's no manner of human condition matters. What matters is that we do the job that we're asked to do. So we try to not go for as much about diversity, but to remove the manners of human condition, because we're focused on what we're supposed to be doing, what we're supposed to be executing.
No, but what I want to say, the ground rules you laid earlier on, I think it's very important. As an academic institution, we all got to come to the fact that we must have healthy conversation and debate. I think that's very crucial to the existence of our country and of our democracy. You can tell I wasn't born in the United States originally, but thank God I'm a United States citizen, because this is the only country where I believe we can have those free debate without necessarily killing one another. When we lose that, then I think we've lost ourselves as a country. I think it's really, whether you're from the right or from the left, I think it's important that we can all have the debate and really have conversation and respect other people's views and perspective.
But then how do you create the space on your campuses? I'm sure you encounter this as we do, where there are all kinds of asymmetries. There are asymmetries asymmetries of position, asymmetries of experience, asymmetries of the power differentials, that sometimes in the academy we act as though they aren't there, right? That we're just this immaterial place. And yet those are sitting in the structure even as we try to create that. I mean, Jay, you're in a very hierarchical place, right? I would say I'm not in such a hierarchical place. That last says I got that part right? So it's hard for us in a non-hierarchical place to create the space of everybody feeling that they can be safe and vulnerable in those exchanges. How do you do it in a hierarchical place?
Well, I mean, there's some simple pragmatic things that we do, that you can allow groups to meet. You can allow affinity groups of all sorts of different types, which are healthy, because people like to meet with, because you're in this homogenous group where everybody's wearing the same outfit and everybody's doing the same thing, right? And so everybody's doing it. So a lot of the minorities like to have an affinity group, which allows them to find a place or a space to have conversations and to support each other, and then melt or back out into the rest of the population. So we've found some success by creating those spaces, but part of that is that you demand acceptance and encourage in probably forceful terms that's acceptable, that we respect all of those groups and their ability to meet and their ability to talk and their ability to have that space.
How do you, and maybe Laura, you want to get into this, you have those separate ones, but how do you bridge across, right? How do you come out of those spaces?
I think you have to bring that same kind of intentionality to spaces that are crafted for particular groups of people, to open and constructive conversation across. So I'll share a little bit about what's been going on our campus. We have a group of students who have organized a protest around wanting greater diversity among our faculty and our humanities curriculum. And one of the really wonderful things that has come out of that, in addition to pushing the institution to think much more intentionally about these issues, is that they have taken it upon themselves to create a space of constructive dialogue. They organized a meeting, an open meeting last week, and we certainly provided the space and the opportunity for it, but they crafted a set of statements to kind of outline I'm going to use air quotes for campus, because we really don't have a campus in the traditional sense located in the East Village. But to create a space a set of statements that kind of outlined the challenge that we're seeking to address, to lay out some ground rules, which were to help create this open and constructive dialogue. And their ground rules were pretty simple. We don't want to hear clapping after people's statements. We don't want people to talk over each other. We want to be able to hear people's full thoughts. And if you want to respond to that, there will be an opportunity to do that. And to say that, we know that tensions are high around these issues. We know that we as students even help to create some of the height of those tensions. And what we're saying is that we are here because we want to engage in a constructive conversation. We want to understand the other point of view, and we want to be able to debate and move to a better place. And, do we have a lot more work to do around that conversation? Yes, but it was a great start because there was intentionality around creating an opportunity to hear each other.
I want to take us just for a moment, and then we'll open out to questions, because I have the privilege of you sitting here. So we've been focused on a very specific and timely issue, I think, for all of our campuses, about how we move from a kind of diversity to an actual inclusivity, and what that inclusivity means for us and what it allows us to do going forward, and just how hard that is. But we're all sitting at a moment in different institutions of higher education. And I didn't tell them I was going to ask this question because I hadn't planned it myself. But if you had to say what the biggest challenge you think for your institution or for higher education is right now, what would you say it is? What would you say? And then we'll come back into wherever the audience wants to take us. But we're 4 people who are leading institutions. What's the challenge? Thomas, what's the challenge?
For my own institution, it's pretty simple. 98% of my students are students of color, of our student population, but the faculty doesn't reflect that. So the same thing we're hearing about your humanities group, we hear that a lot. Students come to class, they don't see people that really actually reflect them in the classes. We have, for example, in my math department, we have 32 faculty. There is no African American, there is no Hispanic. So the students complain that sometimes the faculty don't understand them. They come with different views and different perspectives and different issues. So on my campuses is how do we hire faculty that actually reflects the student population?
And how do we think about how much our students have changed and how slowly we have changed with that? Laura, Jay?
I would say it's how do we overcome a sense of division in order to have these constructive conversations? So whether it's division within our own institutions, sometimes once a debate gets started in a difficult way, it requires an extraordinary amount of effort and momentum to overcome that and move to a place of constructive conversation. And it's happening all around us every single day. The world, the country has become a very divisive place. And, you pick up the newspaper, you click on your computer, you turn on the TV, it's all around us. And so it becomes even more incumbent upon us to muster the energy and the effort to overcome that sense of division that has just seeped into the consciousness of our day-to-day existence.
I'll take a different slant, though I fully recognize we have the same problem as everyone does in hiring faculty. Certainly, we're probably all competing for the same faculty to try to have a more diverse faculty. But one of the major challenges we have is attracting and recruiting minorities and women. we as a service have a moral obligation to better represent the society we serve. And at the moment, we don't represent the society we serve. So we're 26% women. We just took in the class of 22 as the highest percentage of minorities, which was 33% minorities, but both of which are too low. And so it's a constant challenge for us to attract women and to attract minorities to the institution.
And I would sort of piggyback on to Laura's of saying, on the one hand, it's how do we reclaim that space that colleges and universities held and that the military academies. We run the risk of irrelevance for higher education if we don't actually insert ourselves in meaningful ways in that civic debate and become the place that builds it, I would say. If I wanted to say what the big long-term challenge, and we'll never get there if we don't manage to create truly inclusive institutions.
I agree.
So you've listened to us. Now, I'll take the questions, starting with students, please, for students, and we'll direct them, but we'll also look at each other for who is the most likely or the best to answer the questions of whatever sort that you want to bring. There's always a momentary pause and then it starts, so that's all right, you know. Sure, yeah.
I mean, this is kind of open for anybody. But I felt like it was kind of touched on, but we're reaching a point, I think, kind of nationally where certain discourses are denying people's existence. What is that line? Like, how do we, whatever I say, how do you reach across the aisle to somebody with a different opinion, and when is the point to, say that you are denying somebody's right to a, happiness and life?
I'll try. I mean, you have to, it cannot be an intolerant tolerance. It has to be, if you're truly going to be tolerant, then then you have to have the civil discourse. I mean, I'll give you, it's a weird example. It popped in my mind. Years ago, as a senior officer, I was traveling in right after the wall had fallen, and I was in Moldova, of all places, and people there were talking to us about the trashy press and what could they do about it. And the senior officer that I was with that was traveling said, he cut him off and said, if you're going to have freedom of the press, then you welcome the trash. If you're going to have freedom of speech, then you're going to get trash. And I think we should, on one level, enjoy the fact that we're in a country that, I guess, trash is acceptable. But also, that we can talk about that. But I think we have to be tolerant. And I think we have to have that civil discourse. And I know that was a crude explanation, and that Laura will be much more eloquent than I was. But,
and I'll take a crack while Laura gets elegant. But because the phrase that some of you know that I have used that I think we struggle with is, what is an exclusive inclusivity, right? And that kind of exclusive inclusivity goes across the spectrum in interesting ways. How do we create the space to meet each other in our humanity as our first step, when we know that there are externals, and historically there have been externals that might choose to deny that? You think about African Americans in our country who were 3/5 of a person, 3/5 of a vote, right? Who were denied their humanity. So sadly, it's not new that we are in a place that you name a group as being denied that opportunity. So how do we first, some of you have heard me say this too, look each other in the eye And I want to go to Laura for the time she met the general she thought she would have nothing in common with. It's not the same example, but it's not the same example, because if we start from the denial of the person that we're with, then we don't move. Am I saying you need to put yourself in front of somebody who says to your face you don't exist or you don't have the right to exist? Of course not. But then you have to figure out the way that you engage or choose not to engage that without then flipping the kind of exclusion that you feel like you're already facing.
Yeah, so, and I'll get to that, because it was such a revelation for me when I had that moment with Jay, the other Jay. But one of the things that I often say at Cooper is that I really hope that we can engage in honest and rigorous debate, but that debate should be fact-based, not hate-based, and it should be grounded in principles that have a reality that's connected to other things we know. I was a philosophy major as an undergraduate, and one of the reasons that I loved philosophy so much was that it offered a framework for logical thinking and debate about things that I had no idea when I first came to college could actually be discussed in a reasoned way. The existence of life, religion, politics. It gave this incredible way of bringing logic and reason to things that are really ingrained in us as passionate people. And somewhere along the way, we've lost so much of that. One of my favorite professors as an undergrad used to he gave a talk once outside of the classroom. And he said that somebody had asked him what his political perspective was, and said the way he described it was that if he were to stand to the absolute left of the political spectrum and squint, and if we were to stand to the absolute left of the political spectrum and squinted through a pair of binoculars, we still wouldn't see him. And yet, he was the best professor I had ever had he was an economics professor who taught Milton Friedman, who taught us the perspective of economists who were all along what we would consider to be a political spectrum. And that example was so instructive to me, that somebody who felt so deeply about his own views could put himself in a position to both articulate and encourage and push us to think about a principled argument that was different from our own. But those principled arguments were very different from a lot of the rhetoric that we hear today that are grounded in ideas of hate. And so I just think it's incumbent upon all of us as individuals who are trying to engage and think and debate in a reasonable way to, yes, think about our own ideology, but also to think about how to have principled, reasoned, fact-based debate about
the appointment near his house.
Great. That was a popular thought. So the moment, so I was at a leadership development thing for what we call C-level executives, and it was a collection of about 20 people who were from all different sort of professional walks of life. So I was running a foundation at the time, so we had 2 people there from the nonprofit space. We had many business leaders, people who ran companies or large divisions, and we had 2 folks from the Air Force, one of which was General John Raymond. I know Ms. J. Raymond, who at the time was a 3-star general and the chief operating officer at the Pentagon, has now gone on to become a 4-star general who runs the Space Command for the Air Force, which I had no idea until I met him that basically the Air Force runs air traffic control for space for the world, among many other roles. So quite a big job, and he had spent his entire career in the military. I had spent my entire career kind of bouncing back and forth between large for-profit financial institutions and nonprofits who were trying to increase access to capital and financial services and funding for education. I'm about this tall, he's about that tall. I grew up in a bicultural household. He grew up in a completely white household. We had completely different existences, completely different professional trajectories, and I just ignorantly assumed that we would have very different leadership profiles and styles, etc. One of the things that you have to do for things like this is do a lot of self-assessment. You have to have other people assess you. And when you go to this session, you spend every day, you're doing a deep dive into one of these assessments. And one of the things that they do is they'll often group you with people who scored similarly to you. And then they'll sort of arrange you in the room, kind of in the spectrum, and it just gives you an opportunity to kind of explore what those different scores and profiles and things might be like. And Jay and I kept finding ourselves paired up with each other. And, you know, the first time we sort of thought it was a fluke. The second time we were looking at each other like, this is strange. I think he thought it was just as strange as I did. And then as the week progressed, what we saw was that we really did, we shared some core principles around our approach to leadership that ended up, you know, putting us in these very similarly situated profiles. I would never have guessed that at the beginning. I learned a lot about our military at that session. I had no interaction with the military at all. I had no idea that the military works so hard to try to be reflective of the population. And I learned a lot about what senior leaders in our military, you know, how they operate, how they think, and the core ways that they try to be inclusive in their thinking. And so even within this incredibly rigid, what appears to a layperson to be this incredibly rigid hierarchy, which it is in some ways, there is an openness to thinking and to finding solutions that I never would have uncovered if I hadn't been willing to understand that there were things about us that were similar.
Next question. Now the hands all go up. Yep.
Could you just outline a little bit more what those values that you guys have in common are that made you so excited to find each other?
And he actually came and spoke at Cooper last fall, and some of the things that he outlined kind of manifest in that way. So, you know, one is that we both share a core belief that we want to do good in the world. And we have had very different ways of approaching that, but I think probably some of what came out in our measures or the way we approach our work is with that larger goal in mind. I think we both are people who deliberately seek out other points of view and feel that our own views will be stronger, having been informed by the views of others who may not necessarily think the same way we do. We both tend to have a pretty inclusive approach to tackling something. So, you know, the importance of teams and the importance of diverse teams, I think, came out a lot in those various scores. We both also have a bit of a take charge mentality within that. There's a job that needs to get done and we want to get it done. So one of the interesting exercises that we had was, there was one day where we had to do these kind of hokey group exercises where you have to, you know, cooperate with your team to get from point A to point B. And this was actually an exercise that the leaders of the program asked Jay to sit out because they knew that he would probably get it right away. So we had sort of, I forget, it was like 8 pieces of wood, and we had to get ourselves from one side of a pit to another side of a pit. And, you know, they didn't let him participate, but you could see him.
They made me sit out the same one.
Oh, did they? Yes. But you could see it. He had his hands in his pockets. He's just trying to contain himself because he so wanted to just get in there and solve the problem, and he knew that he could, but he restrained himself, followed the orders of the people who were running the program. But as soon as they said, okay, Jay, you can get in there, he kind of figured it out, and we were all across to the other side and beat everyone else. So I think we also shared this kind of we've got to get it done mentality. We just also operate in a way that says we're going to probably get it done in a better way if we take lots of views into account.
Lots of hands now. We'll try to get them all. Yeah.
So this is for our 3 guests. How do your institutions handle what I and many other students perceive to be attacks on the administration and campus values, such as those made by Professor Abrams? How do your institutions respond to those?
Could you say the question over?
Can you repeat the
So the question was for our three guests, how their institutions responded to attacks or perceived attacks on the administration of the institution, such as the opinion piece by Professor Abrams. You can answer that in the hypothetical or in the direct. I leave that to you.
In fact, I read the particular article in question, and I think your president espoused it earlier on. It's his right to actually write and publish that. If that had happened in my institution, obviously I'll have a conversation with him to really find out where he's coming from and how we can work together to change, understand his perspective and also understand our perspective. From the outcry from the students, I can understand that too, but I think the important dialogue or lesson from this particular episode, which I will have discussion with the students, is to say he has every right to write the article, but I think it's part of the tolerance that we were talking about and respect earlier on, to respect his point of view. And how do we use his writing to make all of us a better person in the interest of our institution?
I think what's interesting is the word that you use, attacks. And so, I mean, I can't see a place for attacking anyone about anything, really. That I think in my institution, and we've had, you can imagine a military institution, we've had faculty members who've written on a lot of topics, and in some cases they are critical of, say, the administration, or critical of some government agency, or critical of some portion of the Department of Defense. And you can imagine that can be kind of odd, but we allow that and encourage them to write and do the scholarship as faculty. But it would never be acceptable for someone at the institution to attack them or to pick on their ideas. It would be acceptable to have a debate, to want to talk to them and want to discuss, have the interplay. I will go back in my history. I was a cadet in the 80s at the Air Force Academy, and I had an Argentine officer who was a professor, and I had a British officer that was a professor, and the Falklands War broke out. And they held an event. One on that chair, one in this, room full of thousands of people, and they talked about that, and I was very struck by the discourse that the two of them had when their nations were at war, and it was remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, so every institution is unique, so take that for what it is. It's hard to know the specific circumstances and people and players here. I think at Cooper, we've tried to do a few things. Actually, I was recalling an incident that happened actually before I arrived on campus, where a faculty member had posted a piece from a conservative media outlet, and the piece was really about, he posted the piece on his door to talk about the difficulty that conservative faculty members have in expressing their views. The piece also contained some really erroneous and insulting comments about issues of sexual assault on campus. And so it was unclear, but without talking to the faculty member, it was unclear why he posted that. And so people who were particularly mindful of the issues of sexual assault assumed that he posted it for that reason. My predecessor at the time took the approach of reaching out to the faculty member and having a conversation with him, asking him why he posted it, pointing out to him the things that were perceived and were, in fact, offensive about it. He ended up taking it down on his own because it was not his intent to create tension around issues of sexual assault. I think we have to ask ourselves when people either post things anonymously or when they put them out in outlets before, and I'm not talking about this particular situation because I don't know what led up to it, if anything. But when people post things anonymously or put information out into the world without having a direct conversation with the people to whom they are speaking, I think we have to ask ourselves why somebody might do that. Did they not feel that they had the appropriate platform to engage in conversation? Did they not want to? And then to try to address some of those root causes. Over the last 2 weeks, we've, as I said, had very active discussion and protest on campus about our humanities curriculum. And the approach that we've taken is to open up the conversation to support people's right to protest. Many important things have happened in this country only because of protest. And to support that protest, it's been peaceful protest. It's been, it's been clear that students are trying to share very cogent thinking about the approach to their education. And then to create space for open and constructive dialogue, which, as I've said, the students actually have been really masterful in setting the framework for that, which I think is allowing us to have really constructive conversation. We're in the midst of it, and so I can't tell you exactly how it will turn out or whether the decisions that we're making about it are necessarily the right ones. But for now, I feel like allowing space for open and constructive conversation is serving us well.
So I definitely appreciate that all these different viewpoints are being expressed, but something that I worry about is positing that all speech is equal and all speech and all ideas are productive in a modern political discourse, because speech doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Speech becomes trash actions, and those actions have real negative consequences for women, for people of color, for anyone who exists in today's society. And so when we agree to have discourse with people whose very ideas are antithetical to modern ideals of justice and equality for all people, when we have discourse with them, are we not validating those as valid political ideologies, when in reality these ideas can no longer be accepted, in my opinion, as valid political standpoints? How can we argue that to value all speech as equal and to tolerate all viewpoints is not just allowing virulent nonsense to be accepted in that?
I don't really think you're validating it, but I think it's important that you allow them to express their own views. I think the general would tell us better. In countries where you don't allow people to do that, the consequences are even far worse. So in a modern democracy as ours, in fact, what I truly appreciate about this country from other countries where there is no utopia anywhere in the world, but I don't know if this is the closest thing to it, but I think it's better than what other countries that I know, is that tolerance, that ability to listen to people and allow everybody to express their opinion, whether we like it or not, or whether we even totally disagree with it.
But I think, oh, sorry.
It doesn't necessarily mean you're validating it. It means that you're allowing people to express their expression. It's my hope and believe that it doesn't lead to violence. It doesn't lead to demeaning people. We shouldn't tolerate that when it gets to that point, but I think we should allow people to express their
words do matter.
Yes, they
right?
do.
We believe words that matter, and it's very interesting to watch this moment of generational difference, of generations who prized free speech as the way that we got through civil rights, as the way that we had women's suffrage, that free speech was really what did that. But free speech is not unlimited speech. Free speech doesn't actually mean that you can say anything, anytime, anywhere. And academic freedom doesn't mean that you have the right to do anything just because you're at an institution. But before we start proscribing that speech, I think we have to really think about what it means. It seems fine to proscribe it when you're the one in charge of proscribing it, but having once proscribed it, and someone else is then in charge of that prescription, that, it seems to me, is the challenge and the danger and the line that we're all really trying to walk and understand at this moment, where words matter. And so I'm not giving you an answer, but I am saying that the worry about what the prescription means when you're not the one prescribing is the difficulty. I don't know if others.
I mean, I guess I would offer that from the international perspective, absolutely, that it's the higher principle here is of more value than the speech. And the higher principle is that we should allow people to maintain their views, and that we live in a country that you can maintain those views. And it's perfectly acceptable for you to think that those views are wrong, abhorrent, disagreeable, and it's also perfectly acceptable for someone to think that your views are wrong, abhorrent, and unacceptable. So I think I fall to a higher principle that we would want to live in a place that allows those views. But at the same time, there are limits, and insulting individuals, if it's not done with dignity, not done dignity and respect, as I was yelling about from the tower, then if you can't do it that way, then that's not acceptable.
But I'd also, this is my plug for the next one of these, on November 14th, we have DeRay McKesson here with Sandy Unger with the title Probing the Bounds of Free Speech. And they've already given us readings for that, and the readings range from looting as free speech, looting as free expression. That's not quite the title of one of the articles, but it's not far from that. To an article about coddling the mind of college students with safe speech. So those are already on the website, and there are two other readings that are with them, Sandy Unger and DeRay. And so I agree with you. It's a really critical issue for us to probe at and to work at. And Sandy and DeRay come from very different institutions, but you haven't heard us disagreeing much up here. Sandy and DeRay disagree on some fundamental things, and yet they still are able to sit with each other and push that. So I would encourage you to be part of that. Laura, I don't know if you're going to add anything.
No, I'm not sure I have much to add, other than in one of the other, it's hard to say it's a benefit, but in hearing where people's actual thinking is, challenging as it may be, is I do think it helps us understand where we are or aren't as a country. And I think that as leaders of institutions, it's our responsibility to make sure that not only are we allowing for free speech, but we're creating the platforms to unpack and to unpack it. I found myself when I first watched, if you haven't watched the full video of Jay's speech, I really encourage you to do it. And I found myself really conflicted while I was watching it. On the one hand, I was cheering Jay on and saying, like, thank God he's doing that. On the other, I had this feeling of, but he's telling all those people to get out when really we need to work with them to help them see a different way. And if they get out, how will we do that? I just
save them if they leave.
If they get out, or if the ideas are simply pushed underground, so they're no less reprehensible, the ideas, but they're just buried until there's a moment when they can emerge.
And that scares me, right? Yeah. That really scares me. It's scarier to me for those, so the world we're living in right now is very scary to me when all of this is out in the open. At the same time, it was all lurking right there beneath. It didn't just magically appear. We've made it more possible for people, not we, leaders in this country have made it more possible for people to feel emboldened to say those things, but they felt them before. And so we've had a lot of work to do for a really long time on these issues. And so as much as I hate what is happening right now, there is a part of me that says, let's know what it is so that we know what we're dealing with and we can try to tackle it more directly.
Now all the hands will go here, and I'm just going to kind of make my way around. I'll try to get to everybody. The rest of you who aren't students, good luck tonight.
to me?
Yes.
Okay. So, my question is for Cristle, but I would also love to hear the other administrators weigh in. So at the beginning, you talked a little bit about mutual respect, and specifically in the context of this debate surrounding Professor Abrams. And I have to ask how that we can reconcile mutual respect in this situation, because, for example, he specifically said in his op-ed that he was angry that the school was promoting things that had to do with women's rights, LGBT issues, and I believe Black Lives Matter. So when I hear somebody saying that we have to have mutual respect for opinions, what I hear is someone saying that we have to have respect for his lack of respect for me as a lesbian, or for the students of color in my classes, some of whom are my friends. So how can we exist within that space of mutual respect if I believe we have to be intolerant of intolerance?
So the first thing I would say is, because we're, and this goes to Laura's point, that we have to be very careful about paraphrasing someone else's words and going to what they said or didn't say, and then take it on the argument and take the argument apart. Part of mutual respect doesn't say, I agree with you. Doesn't say you're right. It simply says that I am, and I can dismiss, I can disagree, I can profoundly disagree, but that the terms on which we do it are words. And Professor Abrams isn't here tonight, and I think out of fairness, I'm not a proxy for him in that, and I want to be careful not to be a proxy for someone else's article. And then I think there is the ability I'll go slightly abstract, but in a way that relates. I mentioned earlier asymmetry, right? There's an asymmetry for a student and a tenured faculty member. So how do we create the space where you don't feel like you're in that dialogue with one of your faculty members, but we create the debate or the space that is operating another way? That seems to me part of the way that you do that with mutual respect. So mutual respect doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean that you aren't prepared to say, this is poorly argued, this is not, and it goes to Laura's part, it has all of this. But I would be careful to read what appeared to be a dismissal as a personal dismissal of you as an individual. I wouldn't allow that to, I would ask you not to allow that to be the way you read that article, because that article doesn't have the power to do that to you. But
Again,
and it's an opinion piece. Sorry, that opinion piece does not have the power to do that to you.
again, I don't know the circumstances here, so I don't know the author of it. I found myself wanting to know what he meant, because I read something about a survey. I read something about a frustration of student affairs office putting on particular programs, and I heard a frustration that meant that other views were being dismissed, but I didn't see anything about what those views actually were. And so it was hard for me to understand how I would debate that person. I found myself wanting to be able to ask him questions, to be able to engage in that.
Part of debating is asking those questions, right? And of understanding that the programs are student-developed programs supported by our student affairs staff. And so how you go from one part to the other, I think, is the, right, what you can engage writing and determine whether it's well argued or poorly argued. What are the premises? Are those premises valid premises? And that would, I know that's really hard to do, but that would be what I would say mutual respect would ask. Question there. No.
I have a question adding on to like Laura's pretty spot on observances. So like critiques of division and this desire for common ground are often mentioned in mainstream discussions of dialogue, often on campuses. And so like can this critique of division and this like dogmatic support of civility and the covering up of antagonism sort of like common in a neoliberal state lead to the stifling of radical politics? Has this happened on any of your campuses?
I'd offer
No, go ahead.
I'd offer a couple ideas there. Perhaps we ought to be careful of the power of the printed word. That just because something has been printed or not printed doesn't mean that the ideas that were considered behind it didn't exist before. One of the things that you saw in my speech as I came out with the idea that just because there was racial slurs that were written, if they hadn't been written, I mean, I admittedly say there, we'd be naive to believe that there's not a problem. I mean, I'd be naive to believe that just because someone wrote, oh, suddenly we have a racial problem that didn't exist. No, we had a divisive problem, and it's to Laura's point that, you know, the fact that this is being brought out and discussed. So I'm also cautious of giving the printed word so much power, because the ideas and what's behind them are already there, if that makes sense. And I saw that firsthand, where then when we began to have a lot of conversations about racial division, I mean, what we got out of that was remarkable experiences where we had these discussion forums. I will give an administrator point of view on something like that incident that happened. Is on a leadership point of never waste a crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I took full advantage of the crisis, and we had discussion groups and forums and all of these open sessions and groups, and we had all these different names for them, and it brought different groups together, which we never would have been able to have if the idiot hadn't written those racial slurs. So I took full advantage of the crisis.
I think they all come as teachable moments, really. The incident you're talking about on campus here, really, I think gives us the opportunity to really reflect on different issues and different topics, and how do we come together as a campus community to deal with them.
But I hear you saying which voices are being silenced in that process.
No, I think like the conservative voices are being sort of amplified and given a large platform. And I sort of think this trying to cover up these divisions sort of covers up. Like this desire for like complete civility sort of covers up chances for progressive change, if that makes sense. I hope
I don't think it does. I think it gives you opportunity to really reflect and talk about the issues. I mean, look at one article, the conversation we're having on it. There are diverse views, but it gives us opportunity as a campus community to really talk and reflect.
So I don't know that or I wouldn't say, I won't speak for my colleagues. We're not describing, I'm not trying to describe a place where we all come to a consensus at the end, right? Or where we come to some middle ground that we all agree on, but where we have a space to understand where we're coming from. And to the degree that voices are silenced on any part of the debate, which is what happens so quickly, is for me the most concerning point, right? Down here, because I haven't gotten it.
So we've been talking a lot about the past month or so about the ideas of freedom of speech and mutual respect. And then you sort of bring up these ideas of power imbalances, which are obviously like what people here have been talking about. And they all seem really superficial to me, because I feel that a significant portion of the student body does not feel heard. Meanwhile, Samuel Abrams goes on a national paper and describes what he feels is this horrible, like, left-wing plot in academia. He works for multiple right-wing think tanks and groups that have changed academia and political policy and economic policy in this country for the past 30, 40 years. Meanwhile, you bring on a man who works for an institution that actively silences people by starting war. I don't understand how you can sort of create this like idea in your head how talking about it's fine while at the same time not really properly listening to the student body. To me, and the last statement you just made seems no different to me than Trump after Charlottesville saying there are bad people on both sides.
Well, I'll certainly, since you had to wave at me with an accusation, I'd offer that my firmest belief as a military officer is the civilian control of the military. And the greatest control you can have of the military and the actions of the military is tomorrow.
And I would offer at a much more local level that we have 1,400 undergraduate students who have widely divergent views, lived experiences, who we bring together in this community with a fantastic faculty in 4 years that are really tough in many ways, that are decentering, that also open your life out, and that my responsibility is to find the way with our principals to engage with all of those students. And it doesn't mean that I engage with all of you in the same way all of the time. Now I'm being very local. Jay was being very global. But it seems to me that that's what we have to be and become as a community. And part of that is that we are here as a group of individuals at a key moment in your lives of what you will be here and what you will be as you move beyond. And that's the environment we create, but the administration provides, facilitates, leads, makes the space, and that the students and the faculty and the staff together make the community we are. Sorry? Go ahead.
Hi. There have been calls for alternatives to the dialogues and discussions that we have been having on campus, of which Sam Abrams is only one person to have asked this question. And I would like to ask you, all four of you, what are the alternatives to the dialogues and discussions going on campus right now?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
So I think what you're asking us is from an opinion piece that a faculty member wrote, where he suggested there should be alternatives to the programming that were being provided for our students. What we think those alternatives should be?
Well, mainly what I'm saying is that there have been calls for alternatives to discussions going on campus, and what do the four of you believe that should both be the flaws in discussions that are going on campus and what the alternatives should be?
So I'll take a crack at part of that, which is to say that we need to represent and define spaces for multiple viewpoints on every campus in the country. We need to have healthy debate. We need to have spaces where students feel safe, but where they also feel safe to come out of those spaces into contact with different. And so I would say that's what we've been talking about in a variety of ways tonight, about what diversity lived is, which is really hard. And if you only are spending time with people who share your views, who share your backgrounds, who share your experiences, you can reinforce those, and you'll leave Sarah Lawrence and you'll be in a world with people who do not do any of those things, and we will not have served you well. If you're only in an echo chamber, we will not have served you well, because getting uncomfortable is what leads you forward into knowing what you really believe and why you believe it. Because you've had to experience someone who's different, and then you take that out into the world, and you take it out as a person who has critical thinking, who understands why you've made the decisions you are, and who can engage with people who aren't like you to make meaningful change in the world. One of the most interesting anecdotes I heard was from one of our graduates, Kaya Stevens. Peter's heard her speak. She did our graduate commencement speech, but she went to Alabama, And she started what was at first an arts in prison program in Alabama. And when she was here, one of the things she said was, some of you will think I'm complicit because I'm working with the prison system. Some of you who are working in otherwise will think I'm complicit because I'm encouraging it. And she said, and one of the hardest times for me was in working with someone who was responsible for the executions in Alabama. And this is her story, so I'm not going to tell the whole story. But the end of that story was that person ended up being the contact who allowed her to get 4-year degree programs into Alabama prisons from Auburn University. And if she had dismissed him from the start, she would never have been able to effect a really important and significant social change. And you're going to leave here, or you're going to vote tomorrow, I hope, and you're going to leave here and you want to make change, and that's going to mean you have to work with people who aren't like you. So it's our job to try to put you in situations where you learn how to do that, where you learn how to fight for what you believe and do it with passion, and where you learn that not all the world thinks like you do. And if you only want to be around people who think like you do, then find the island, but you're not going to actually be able to make change. All the way in the back. All the way in the
They're
back.
hanging on.
I know you've been persistent, yeah.
Sorry about that.
In the shadows.
Not used to being
In the
on
shadow back there.
He's been very persistent.
And you're the last question.
According to a Military Times article published October 23rd, 2017, titled, "1 in 4 troops sees white nationalism in the ranks," quote, nearly 42% of non-white troops who responded to the survey said they have personally experienced examples of white nationalism in the military, and, quote, when asked whether white nationalists pose a threat to national security, 30% of respondents labeled it a significant danger, more than many international hotspots like Syria, 27%, Pakistan, 25%, Afghanistan, 22%, and Iraq, 17%. How can we expect our military to uphold justice if a large number of its members hold beliefs that are not only dangerous but also antithetical to the stated principles of our country? And what role might the Air Force Academy play in addressing this grave and frightening problem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question. Because
Students do their homework.
Pardon me?
Our students do their homework.
Because it's absolutely my responsibility, as I laid out, to focus so much on the character and the quality of these individuals. So I have 25% of the officer corps of one service. So I assess in 1,000 lieutenants into the United States Air Force. So that's 1/4 of one service. So my responsibility is to do absolutely everything I can. The answer to your question is, what role do I play? It's the most important role that I play, which is the development and the character and the morality and the ethics of the 1,000 officers that I produce. And we start that as far left as we can. For all of our cadets coming in, they have to be nominated by a member of Congress. So we get 435 members of the House and 100 senators. They can all nominate someone. So then through that, we begin to work on 1/3 of what we evaluate is character and leadership through interviews into the members' offices and then interviews that we do. 1/3 of it's to evaluate character and leadership. So my role is to focus on that while they're there. I'm also naive to believe that once they enter and they show up in our space, that they instantly flip to our values. So we focus on a 4-year program to continue to build on those values. So certainly surveys like that are equally as troubling to me as they are to you and to all of us. But a survey across the entire 1.6 million members that are served in all of the services in the Guard and the Reserve, et cetera, doesn't represent what we're trying to do and doesn't represent the role that I have. I'm trying.
I want to thank Laura and Jay and Thomas for being here tonight. I want to thank all of you for being with us and for the respectful dialogue we engaged in. I know there were moments of agreement and disagreement. I hope that the conversation we started will continue as you go out, and I hope to welcome you back on November 14th. Thank you.